Okay, welcome to this Highland League Weekly panel where we're discussing all of the weekend just past. Saturday's Brechin Highland League matches. A full card took place on Saturday, and myself and Callum Law, who's next to me, will be discussing all of the weekend's results. This panel is taken from our main weekly Press and Journal Highland League Weekly show, which is over on the Press and Journal website, and the main show also features highlights every week from two matches, as well as features on the Highland League and its various colourful clubs and characters. To access full shows though, you need to be a subscriber to the Press and Journal website, and you can become a subscriber at the moment for the low price of just £1 for your first 3 months. But yes, on to the weekend's matches, and the first game we'll be discussing is our main game from the weekend, which was Clachnacuddin against Keith. Callum, then, Clachnacuddin 2 wins from 2 at the start of the new Brechin Highland League season. They beat Keith 2-0 at Grant Street Park on Saturday.
2 wins out of two clean sheets, and I was looking back the last time Connor Geth in Sydney's interview. Don't know when that last happened, winning their first 2 league games. What was season 2006, 2007? So, that's quite a, it's 18 years ago now. So, I mean, that's just sort of shows maybe the difficulties Clark have had. So to start with two wins, as well as the 2 clean sheets, makes a big difference. Again, it's a good sign of progress for them. I do think in terms of the game on Saturday, I didn't think there was a great deal between the teams over the 90 minutes. What I would say is I felt Clark always had a wee bit more sort of composure about them in the final third. Like Keith, first half especially, got into some good positions and good areas, but it was just all a wee bit hurried, I felt, or rushed. Like they were maybe snatching at things, or snatching at shots, or maybe shooting when there was a better pass, or passing when they could have shot. Just wee sort of things with that final bit of quality that you need in the final third wasn't quite there. By the same token, on another day, that might have equalised, because Connor Kylo's free kick was certainly on the money, but that's why Clark sort of did very well in the summer to tempt Joe Mallon out of retirement, because that's the sort of saves that he makes that you need in the big moments.
On the subject of goalkeepers, I seem to recall last week we're praising Craig Reid for already having a penalty save under his belt for Keith. Put the hex on him slightly ahead of the latest game, because conceded direct from a corner, which no one ever wants to do, but I did read in your report that it was a swirling wind perhaps at Grant Street.
It kind of sort of picked up at times. It wasn't sort of consistent, but that sort of period at the start of the second half, it was swirling, and you saw with the corner just before, and I was speaking to Alan McPhee after the game actually about it, that he, with that corner, he sort of came in and into the front post, and he sort of felt with the next one, and all the sort of players crowded into the 6-yard box as a result. He kind of felt with the next one, if he could get a wee bit more height on it, more towards the back post, he might get a bit more joy, and that's exactly what happened. And I think it's one of them, it's like difficult for Craig Reid in that situation, or the goalie, a wee bit, because everyone's basically in your 6-yard box and you know the ball's coming in. The sort of feeling maybe is, right, I need to be decisive here, so I'll just come and sort of clear everything out. But then if you don't get there, obviously you're in trouble, because you saw a later corner from the other side, he sort of hung back and was able to deal with it at the back post. So I think in that sort of conditions, and when the deliveries are on the money as well, it's not necessarily easy in that situation, but I'm sure it's a goal that Craig even still probably won't want to see back.
Okay then, let's move on then to our second highlights game from Saturday, which was Huntly against Wick Academy. Okay then, Huntly as well then, 2 wins from 2 for them, beating Wick 3-0. I actually thought, I don't know if it's necessarily clean in the highlights unless you're really paying attention to the team lines and my excellent commentary, but Adam Morris didn't actually start the game for Huntly, but I thought he was excellent throughout after coming on in 15 minutes?
He looked very good, and Aye, he was almost as good as your commentary, since you're being that modest. But no, he was. I mean, Adam Morris is a player that when he was at Huntly a couple of seasons ago, and even before that when he was at Fort William, you saw flashes of what he could do, and he's come back this summer, and that's probably the first sort of. And only had 2 competitive games, but he didn't start last week against Strathspey. But then he's come on. I mean, they'll hope Lewis Crosby is not unavailable for any great length of time because he's an important player for Huntly. But he's come on, and I thought he looked a real pest, and obviously had quite an influence on the game with his corners and winning the penalty and things like that. So, no, a good sort of reintroduction for him. I mean, Huntly as well, another team that have had a good start with 2 wins out of 2, and Christie Park it's a very cliched term, but they want it to be a fortress for them, and at the moment it kind of is. I mean, even you go back into last season, they haven't lost at home since the end of January, which, you know, regardless of who you are, that's a good run of form at home. And I think with the way the fixtures landed with Strathspey and Wick at home to start, it was a good chance for sort of Colin Charlesworth's side to make a positive impression, and that's exactly what they've done.
Sam Robertson with a couple of goals. He scored in the opening weekend as well.
Well, he's 3 goals in 2 games, and I mean, Sam Robertson's one where you go back, he sort of had good spells at times with Cove, and then Bucky dropped down to junior football with Dice, come back in to Highland League Inverurie Locos, and for whatever reason, I mean, last season certainly the first half of it wasn't exactly vintage for Inverurie anyway, and for whatever reason it's never quite happened for him there. But sort of fresh start going to Huntly, and it looks like he's sort of settled in really well. Quite a versatile player in terms of can sort of play in any of the forward positions. And I mean, his first goal on Saturday is a sort of goal that please him and please his manager, a sort of poacher's goal when the ball's bouncing about the 6-yard box. That's the sort of goals you want your strikers to be scoring. What I would say as well in terms of the game is, going on the overall sort of what happened, 3-0 is probably harsh on Wick, really. I think, like, if you look at it, the sort of 2 goals for corners, which, I mean, if you don't defend set pieces well enough, you get punished, and then obviously a penalty, and Huntly have taken advantage in those moments. But I mean, Wick, the dark near thing at 1-0 where the ball went right across the face, and Logan Ross has had a couple of, I mean, everyone in Highland League knows how good he is, but he's had a couple of good saves. The one for Ross Gunn especially was absolutely top class. I mean, even just seeing that one is probably quite difficult because there's a lot of bodies in front of him and the ball. So, you know, it's like on another day, if that flies in, it's maybe a different game. So I think as much as Huntly, a good win for them, another clean sheet, I think what Gary Manson sort of said after the game about Wick won't be too down about that. I can see where he's coming from because there wasn't a lot between the sides, I didn't think.
Okay, then let's move on to the weekend's other 7 results.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I know how many games in a full Highland League card finally. We'll start with a standout scoreline from Saturday, which was Rothes 2, Formartine United 10. This game very much seemed to hinge a little bit on a saved penalty that Jake Thompson took for Rothes with the score at 3-1 just before half time. Doesn't score. Scoreline could have went to 3-2 ultimately in the second half. Rothes, well, maybe a combination of Formartine really showing the amount of goal threat they have in their side, and Rothes not really being at the races, and the game kind of getting away from them. Richard Hastings described the scoreline as totally embarrassing in the end.
Well, I think it's like nobody likes getting beat, clearly, but once you get up into that sort of double figures region, there is just that sort of bit of notoriety is probably the wrong word, but you know, it sort of has that feeling of like, oh, it's a sort of more even like it's a more notable scoreline than if it had been like 9-2, you know what I mean? It's just that thing about double figures that everyone wants to avoid, but that's kind of me getting into semantics. But I don't think, like, the saved penalty, Cameron Middleton saving for Jake Thompson, is maybe a game-changing moment. Personally, I don't necessarily think it defined the outcome, because I still think with the way Martin had started and going 3-0 up, I think they'd shown what they were capable of, and then once they maybe got that wee break or wee boost with Cameron Middleton saving the penalty, they've gone on and taken a proper grip on things and shown what they can do. And I mean, we saw them last week against Banks of Dee, and on the day they didn't quite have their shooting boots on against Banks of Dee, but it's clearly not the case this week. And it's like, if you look at the spread of goals, it's not just even like Julian Wade, Scott Adams forward players, Tyler McKeita, Callum Youngson, Johnny Crawford. There's a lot of different threats, not for Martin's side, and I do think you have to give them the credit for being very good on the day, because regardless of who you're playing or what sort of shape the opposition are in, to score 10 goals and win in that manner is mightily impressive from Martin. Another side of it with Rothes, it's like they're missing Greg Morrison, Ben Johnston, Alan McKenzie, Scott Much, like players that probably all start and make a difference. But I think with the tone of what Richard Hastings was saying is, regardless of the team they're putting on the pitch, and even if it is young players, it needs to be better than that.
Yeah. Good bouncing back from Martin though after the opening weekend defeat to Banks of Dee. Inverurie Locos 2, Bucky Thistle 1 was another eye-catching result from Saturday. Bucky Thistle's first game of the season, because they weren't in action on the opening weekend due to other commitments. Cole Anderson scored the opener for Locos, another goal for him. Cohen Ramsey leveller after the break for Bucky Thistle, but sub Logan Johnston with a late winner for the home side at Harlow Park. Cole Anderson, first of all, Dean Donaldson mentioned him in his post-match quotes after the first game, saying that he's turning into a really good player. Obviously the son of Russell Anderson, former Aberdeen captain, who we know well. Friend of the show, potentially, I don't know. But it does feel like it's maybe a big season in store for Cole.
It certainly could be. I mean, you forget sort of that he's still quite young in terms of being early 20s, because he sort of was in and made his debut for Martin, I think, when he was 16. And I think it's just now that he's found a team in a position where he'll play regularly and he sort of knows what his job is. Like, I think Locos sort of found quite a good blend the second half of last season in terms of their midfield, with like Lloyd Robertson and then Cole Anderson and Jay Halliday. And if those three are sort of can continue that, I think they'll all have good seasons. But I mean, Cole's a player with a lot of talent, and you go back to time at Martin, you maybe saw it in flashes here and there, but he's now sort of delivering on quite a consistent basis for Inverurie. I think Inverurie, another team still 100% with a 100% record. I think what you're perhaps seeing now as well is they're a bit more battle hardened, and it's cliched, but streetwise, because you look at like last week against Devon Vil, down to 10 men really early and managing to come through and win that game, and then against Bucky on Saturday, we've seen it not just with Inverurie but plenty other teams. Once Bucky peg you back in that sort of final 10-15 minutes, there can be an onslaught and you can end up losing, but Locos stood up to that and found a way to win it themselves. For
Bucky, and I mean, we've discussed this a little bit in pre-season and before the campaign started, but Clach have clearly strengthened. We've talked about them already. Huntly were strong in the first part of last season. Is with Inverurie starting the way they have and getting that result against the reigning champions, is that a little bit of a sign of how difficult it's going to be for the teams that want to win the title this season? There's a lot of strength in the league.
It does feel like there's a lot of teams. I mean, we'll come on to their results later, but there's a couple of sides dropping points that you maybe wouldn't have expected, and even you look at last week with like Wick beating Fraserburgh and things like that. There is a lot of quality now right across the league, and a lot of those teams, Inveruries, Huntleys and teams like that, who are wanting to get closer to the top six, and to do that you kind of need to take points off the top six. I think with Bucky as well, it's like Lewis McKinnon, I think it was in relation to the sort of first half performance, mentioned the word sloppy, and I think in a sense maybe that could apply to most sort of what happened overall. Like the first goal, which I think we should be able to show you if we haven't already on screen, was just sort of carelessness in possession, which gave Cole Anderson his chance. And then at the end, I mean, it's one of them where maybe getting to late in the game into stoppage time and Inverurie have a corner, and I'm sure Lewis and his coaches are probably thinking, well, if we can't win the game now, it's the old adage, don't lose it. And realistically, coming away from Harlow Park with a point maybe wouldn't have been the worst result in the world, but they weren't able to defend that situation, and it's just two goals they'll probably look at as avoidable and just a bit lax on the day, really.
Yeah. Okay, Callum mentioned we'll come into other examples of teams dropping points. First one, Banks of D 0, Lossiemouth 0. Great first point for Eddie Wyblack's Lossie, first and foremost. But Banks of D last season, we've discussed this as well so far on Highland League Weekly this term, their big issue last season was drawing games that you'd probably on paper expect them to pick up 3 points in, and having beat Formartine last week in an impressive opening result this season, Banks of D, they then drop points at home a week after against Lossie, which will be frustrating for them.
Definitely, and I think Paul Lawson actually after the game, there was sort of no sugarcoating it. He said they didn't deserve to win the game, and they could have. I mean, Ross Archibald hit the post when Lossie were kind of creating some openings late on, so on another day they could have lost that game. And I think it's like, again, you can speak about players being missing in Banks of D. It's like Andy Hunter, Kane Winton, Hamish McLeod, Jevon Anderson, like these sort of players. I think Lachie McLeod's only fit enough to be on the bench, come on in the second half. Like, they're big players that were unavailable for Banks of D, but at the same time, with the recruitment they've done, they do have a lot of depth in their squad, and maybe some of those players that featured at the weekend didn't do enough to justify their place in the team. However, I think you've also got to give a lot of credit to Lossie, because I know, speaking to people there, they were a bit sort of down after. I think there was a lot of optimism last week, and then first half against Clach they didn't really show up. Saturday they maybe had to play in a slightly different way, I think, in terms of probably giving up more possession than like Eddie Wyblack would ideally like, and having to be organised, but then also they managed to pose a threat on the counter. And I think like Lossie have shown over quite a few seasons now, it's very rare that even if they lose that they'll get a lot of goals put past them. Like, they are a very organised, dogged, hard working, difficult team to play against, and they showed all of those qualities and a lot more to get that point on Saturday.
Yeah. Fraserburgh, they're still without a win after 2 games in the 2024-25 Breedon Highland League. They drew 1-1 at home to Devon Vil on Saturday. Scott Barber had Fraserburgh in front in the first half, but Ben Hermiston, recent Devon Vil addition, big tall striker, isn't he? Mm-hmm. He scored the equaliser for the visitors in the second half. Mark Cowie says Fraserburgh are going through a tough time at the moment.
It's just never really quite clicked for them in the opening 2 games so far. Just it's that old thing a wee bit, both boxes, where they're not maybe creating enough, or certainly what chances are creating, they're not taking enough of them. It's like they're not at their best not on Saturday. At 1-0 up, first half, they had a couple of pretty good chances that they didn't take, and it's like if you take one of them at 2-0, they're probably able to go on and see that out. But I mean, Ken, on the flip side of that, you go to the other end, and you know they weren't able to keep a clean sheet and win 1-0. So it's just, I think, struggling maybe to find the usual sort of fluency that you would expect with Fraserburgh's play, certainly going forward. But I mean, it's a funny old game in a way, because you look at their fixtures this week, they're playing Bucky on Wednesday night, Brechin on Saturday, both of which you'll be able to see on Highland League Weekly. But even though they haven't been great in the first 2 games, it wouldn't really surprise you if they then went and won their next 2. That's the sort of thing they're capable of. On the other side of it, Devon Vil, after maybe a bit like Lossie, probably being quite disappointed last weekend, to go away to Fraserburgh, come back for a goal down to get a point, is a very good result for them, and certainly gives them something to work on. And I mean, even just in terms of the goal scorer, Ben Hermiston coming in and sort of hitting the ground running, getting that first goal, and he caused a few other problems, I think, for the back line as well. He could prove, I mean, I think Devon Vil, probably given interest in him from elsewhere, probably did quite well to get that deal over the line, and maybe the sort of the work and cash they've put into that will reap rewards for them. It certainly did on Saturday.
A couple of our inverted commas title hopefuls did do the business on Saturday. The first one, Strathblane Thistle 0, Brora Rangers 7. Another ruthless scoring display from Brora. Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at this result as I said, an example of the amount of goals Brora have in their team. Jordan McRae all over that match report. But Strathblane again, in the first couple of weeks of the season, not quite. If you're being really optimistic, you would maybe hope for Strathblane to be slightly stronger in the opening weeks of the campaign.
Well, you would. I mean, I think there's been a lot of optimism about Strathblane and this sort of new squad, new management, sort of new folk involved to running the club. But they're planning big things off the park in terms of improving facilities, and lots of sort of feels like lots of good stuff going on in the background, but on the park it feels a bit more like this same old really that we've seen before. I mean, they did have 5 or 6 players who would have probably started unavailable on Saturday, but at the same time that's why you have a squad. And I just thought, watching highlights of this game, they look, and I'll come on to Brora, and they're a very good side and they can rip any team apart really, but I just thought watching the highlights, Strathblane looked very sort of disjointed and almost disorganised really, in terms of struggling to sort of cope with how Brora moved the ball and their sort of movement off the ball and things like that. And I mean, Bobby Beckwith and Ronnie Sharp are sort of 2 experienced heads who generally those sort of things in terms of being disciplined, organised, hard-working, you would associate with teams they've been involved with before. But it wasn't there on Saturday, and you sort of, for Strathblane supporters, you sort of worry a wee bit. It's like, in terms of 2 heavy defeats to start the season, albeit against teams that were in the top 7 last season, but 2 heavy defeats, and it's like, if you get another sort of couple of bad ones or that, how much of the sort of confidence and belief maybe drains out of the squad, and it can be quite hard to sort of get back. But clearly need to be better. But Brora, I mean, did their job very well. Like last week, goals for lots of different areas. Can start 2 games that they've had to start, Turriff at home, Strathblane away, that you would expect Brora usually to win those games, but they've done it very impressively. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how they get on with it, take on one of the other big boys on that subject. Nairn County 0, Brechin City 3. Tighter game in terms of scoreline. This one, Dale Robertson, Anthony McDonald and Ewan Loudon with the goals for Brechin, but it did sound from...
Well, I was going to say, you're saying tighter in terms of scoreline, but it sounded pretty one-sided, and I think Ross Tokley said afterwards he was kind of relieved to get out with 3 because Nairn didn't really lay a glove on Brechin on the day, which I'm slightly surprised at, because I think Nairn will be a handful for a lot of teams this season, especially at Station Park. But I don't know, maybe they were, because Bucky were in the Cup, they didn't play last Saturday as well. I don't know if there's maybe that was a factor in it, or it was just Brechin being very good. I do I think Nairn, you just sort of move on quickly. They're playing Clach on Wednesday night in the derby, so probably a pretty good game to have to try and bounce back. But I think Brechin have had probably quite a few notches up in terms of performance compared with last week when they won against Keith. And I do think, watching footage for this game, Dale Robertson, new summer signing striker, maybe could have had more goals on Saturday, but he looked pretty impressive to me. I thought his goal was a sort of good striker's goal, front post header, and he won a free kick for the second. He was always quite involved, and I think the other thing noticeable about him is every time the ball goes in the box, it's almost like he's a magnet for the ball. It always seems to find its way to him when it goes into the box, which is what you want from your strikers, really, to be getting into those positions and getting chances. So I thought he looked good, and I think over the piece for Brechin, a thoroughly enjoyable afternoon for them. They were very good, and Mark Scott was sort of injured towards the end of last season, was a loss to them. Him being back fully fit is a big boost as well.
Big player. Okay, one more game to discuss from Saturday. It was Turriff United 2, Forest Mechanics 2. Avoided this phrase so far this week, I believe, but this was your proverbial game of two halves. This one, fast start from Turriff, goals from Ewan Robertson and Ewan Clark reasonably early on, very early on even. But Forest battled back in the game in the second half. Aidan Cruikshank penalty, and then a late Mark McLaughlin leveller from 25 yards, which I've seen.
Absolute screamer.
Pile driver.
Probably a goal of the weekend. But the game of two halves cliche, you took the words right out of my mouth, and it's one of them game of two halves and neither manager particularly happy, because Warren Cummins sort of felt from 2-0 in front with 25 minutes to go, it was still 2-0, that Turriff should have been good enough to go on and win that game. Then the flip side, Steve McDonald sort of felt Forest creating chances in the second half and sort of putting on the pressure towards the end, that they could have come out and claimed all 3 points. I think on balance it's a better point for Forest than it is Turriff, given that they were trailing and given sort of the setback they had last week against Rothes and down to 9 men and all that and getting beat. So for them to sort of respond in the way they did and leave the Hawks was a positive for them. I think Turriff, sort of what Warren was touching on a wee bit, but game management and maybe playing in the right areas and things like that maybe needs to be a wee bit better for them. Okay then, before we move on, let's have a look at the Brechin Highland League table, something that no manager in the league will be looking at this stage in the season, of course. But here's the latest standings, because we're interested. Alright then, that's all of Saturday's Brechin Highland League matches discussed, and we've given you a little look at the latest Brechin Highland League standings. Just a reminder, if you'd like to watch the full Highland League Weekly shows, not just the Monday shows, but also, like we're doing this week, midweek extra shows. This week it's Bucky Thistle against Fraserburgh highlights that are coming out on the Press and Journal website on Thursday. You need to be a subscriber to the Press and Journal website, so that will get you access to the Monday shows with at least 2 highlights matches and features, as well as those midweek extra programmes. You can become a subscriber at the moment for the low price of just £1 for your first 3 months, which I think is a decent enough deal. If you want to keep up to date with Highland League Weekly and Highland League content from the Press and Journal generally, you can follow us not just here on YouTube but on X, where we're at Highland LW, as well as on Facebook, where there's a Highland League Weekly group for fans of the league and all its various discussion topics. You can also sign up to our Highland League newsletters from the Press and Journal, which will get the latest Highland League and Highland League Weekly news straight in your inbox twice a week. There's a link to do that below this video. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed this chat. We'll be back on YouTube next week dissecting this coming weekend's matches, but if you'd prefer, you can join us over on the Press and Journal website by becoming a subscriber.
We'll see you next time.